She was like a mother to me, until I stopped being a kid. When my mother died, my father quickly married a younger woman. She was only 22 when she arrived at our house, and back then, I was just a young boy who needed a maternal figure. She took on that role effortlessly, until everything changed. 4 years later, I returned from university as a man. And my father was still busy with his business, unaware that his wife and I were looking at each other differently. That the bond we shared had transformed into something more, something forbidden. When my mother passed away, my father, Eduardo, didn't take long to seek comfort in another woman. It didn't surprise me. He was never the type to endure loneliness. What did surprise me was his choice, Clara, a woman barely 22 years old. She was young, too young for him. Too young to be my stepmother. But she was. Eduardo was 54 when Clara first came into our home. He introduced her proudly, like a trophy. But she didn't look at me like a stranger who was simply there out of convenience. She smiled at me warmly, with a kindness I hadn't expected. At the time, I was still young. And despite her age, Clara became my refuge. She would wake up early to make me breakfast. She helped me with my schoolwork when my father was too busy with his business. When I had nightmares about my mother, she was the one who would come into my room in the middle of the night and whisper that everything would be okay. She bought me things without my father knowing. She took me to the movies, made me laugh. She wasn't a stepmother. She was my friend. She was the only maternal figure I had left. For years, our relationship stayed the same. Until I left. Getting a scholarship for university was my escape. I left as a teenager, leaving behind my father, Clara, everything I knew. But I never forgot her. Even from a distance, she would write to me, call me. She would ask how I was, if I was eating well, if I needed anything. She still cared about me. 4 years later, I returned home. I returned as a man. My father was proud. He always had been, but this time it was different. I had graduated with honors, and now he was looking for ways to include me in his company. He talked about plans, my future, what we would achieve together. But that wasn't what occupied my mind. It was Clara. It wasn't that she had changed. She was still the same woman I had met years ago. It was me who no longer saw her the same way. Before, her presence felt familiar, comforting. But now I struggled to ignore things that had once gone unnoticed. The way she moved through the house with such confidence, how she leaned over the table when we talked, the casual brush when we passed each other in the hallways. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was, but I could no longer see her the same way. The moment that really made me realize what was happening was one night when my father stayed late at the office. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself something to drink, and she appeared wearing one of his shirts, one of those oversized ones that barely covered what was necessary. She leaned over the table to grab something, unhurried, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. When she turned and saw me looking at her, she just gave me a sideways smile, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Those kinds of things started happening more often. Unnecessary touches, hugs that lasted too long, a kiss on the cheek that landed too close to my lips. Until the inevitable happened. My father had a business trip and would be away for several days. As always, he left me in charge of the house, never imagining what was happening under his own roof. I decided to throw a party, something small, just friends and acquaintances. When I told Clara, I expected her to say no, that she thought it was a bad idea. But instead, she smiled and said she actually wanted to join. The night of the party, Clara didn't seem like my father's wife. She looked different. More free, more relaxed. She drank with us, laughed, danced. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't help but notice that she was looking at me in a way she never had before. We danced. I don't know who started it, whether it was her or me, but suddenly we were too close, moving to the rhythm of the music, her body pressed against mine. The people around us were either too drunk or too caught up in their own things to notice what was happening between us. When the party ended and the house fell silent, we kept drinking in the living room, laughing at anything and everything. The alcohol did its job, and when our eyes met, there was no turning back. The first kiss was slow, hesitant, as if we were testing the limits. But one kiss led to another, and another, until nothing else mattered. That night, I crossed the line. We crossed it. But it wasn't just once. Weeks passed. Months. We took advantage of every opportunity, every moment alone. There were times when we almost got caught, but the adrenaline only made it more intense. And the worst part, it wasn't just about sex. We started feeling something more. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that, if my father found out, would destroy everything. Everything was fine, until she got pregnant. The worst part? We didn't know if the baby was mine or my father's. The impact was immediate. Clara was in shock, and I could barely process it. There was no way to know without tests, and taking them would raise suspicions. I couldn't say anything, but the doubt was eating me alive. For the first time, I asked myself what the hell I was doing. What if the baby was my father's? What if it was mine? How could I face something like this? Not only was I betraying the only family I had left after losing my mother, I was also ruining the life of the woman I thought I loved. But was it really love? Or just the thrill of the forbidden? Clara was terrified. She avoided looking at me, we talked less and less. I didn't know what to do, confess, run away, lie until the end. But time was running out. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, it would destroy everything. I'm really lost, I need your advice. What would you tell the protagonist? Have you ever faced a dilemma this big? Let me know in the comments. If there are any updates, we'll definitely post a second part. And remember, for more stories like this, click on the 2 videos on the final screen and don't forget to subscribe, because Reddit is interesting.